So today we're talking about skincare. I'm sort of jumping towards skincare products and things like that, just because that's the most kind of practical information to provide right now. At some point, I do want to talk more about how skin works, and then we'll talk about conditions like eczeema and acne and things like that. But today, the real focus is on skincare products. The reason we're doing this right now is because sort of the season to be starting to pull out the sunscreen, and that's kind of for many people, that's one of a major skincare product that they use. And also too, because there's sort of, it's a good opportunity to talk about different additives and things that are in skincare products. So today we're just going to focus on sort of how to choose skincare products, but also really what I recommend for skincare products. And then look at some resources that are available so that you can go beyond what we're going to talk about. There's a lot of things I don't know about skincare products, and many skincare products I'm not familiar with. So I provided some resources at the end so that you can look up your own skincare products to see if they, where they fall in terms of health and safety. So kind of the overview that I want to start with is that, you know, there are a lot of additives in skincare products that are banned in other countries that are legal here. Also, there's the rules for the FDA in terms of their ability to regulate any kind of skincare or personal care products are very limited. The law is actually 83 years old, which you can think about, you know, how things were quite different 83 years ago in terms of the kind of additives and chemicals and everything that were available. And also, really the FDA, not only do they not have control over the, you know, chemicals and products and what's in products as much, also they can't really look at manufacturing procedures and things like that as much for personal care products. So they have really very limited oversight in a range of products that really do affect people's health and that are so very widely used. I think about this, I was on a train one time and there was this woman from Ireland and she had this huge box of this like whitening toothpaste. And I was like, she was so excited. She's like, I'm bringing home the whitening toothpaste. And I was like, what? You know, and she was like, yeah, it's illegal in Ireland. And I was like, oh, right. You know, like, that's a thing. And so, you know, so it's really kind of, you know, it's a big question, you know, but when I think about it, the biggest thing is education, and really each of us, you know, learning how to read labels of skincare products. They're very confusing. Like those, the chemical lists are, you know, are multisyllabic and really hard to discern, you know, including for me, who's done, you know, a certain amount of learning and reading and research about this. So we'll kind of do an overview. Note that nothing that really we're talking about in terms of ingredients to avoid, that's definitely not an exhaustive list. I really want to underscore that when these are kind of some of the more common ones, the ones that are, you know, have a little bit more data behind them. There's two things that we need to think about in terms of the reason why this is not an exhaustive list. First is that a lot of times when a chemical gets bad press, they'll change the name of it. And so it's a similar chemical, or it's the same chemical, but just under kind of a different name. And so that's happened quite a bit. You'll see kind of some of these that have multiple names, especially the formaldehyde type of things, because that's one of the ones that's gotten a lot of bad press. And then the other issue is that there are new chemicals all the time, and also there's new research all the time. So this is kind of going through this list of ingredients to avoid. I'm just going to kind of go through the bigger ones, but what you'll see here is that these are ingredients that are in a lot of things. So, you know, even in that, you know, that trusty moisturizer that you've used for the last 20 years that, you know, says it's all natural on the front, a lot of times you'll find some of these in here. The other thing that to really pull out here is a lot like with foods, when they list spices as an ingredient, that kind of hides a lot of different chemicals and gnarly stuff. For skincare products, the word fragrance is the one to watch for, because that's the one that hides a lot of things. Specifically, we'll kind of come back around to the fact that a lot of times that indicates that there are some phthalates present in the. But if you kind of take nothing else from this whole discussion, avoiding things that have the word fragrance listed in the ingredients is a good general rule of thumb. So the things to avoid: coal tar is something that is found a lot in hair coloring products, but also in certain shampoos, especially for dandruff, things like that. And so it can have a lot of contaminants that are problematic. Diethanolamine, formaldehyde is so, you know, we don't need to go too in depth with each of these, but the formaldehyde is one that we see a lot in hair straightening products. So, and here's the really tricky part is a lot of times people are going to a beauty parlor or to have their hair done, and you know, there's all kinds of things in the ingredients there, and know that with each of these ingredients there is a lot of controversy about how harmful they are to health, right? So so you get, you know, if you look them up, you'll get, you know, some groups saying, hey, this is really harmful, this is what it did in animal studies, and then you'll get other groups saying, actually there's no real data to back this up. And part of the tension there is that there's not human studies because we can't really do human studies that easily. You know, this is something that doesn't happen, you know, within 2 weeks. It's sort of like something that happens over the course of a person's lifetime. And there's no really great way to compare people who have these kinds of exposures to people who don't, partially because they're just so widely present. You know, they're persistent, you know, in the environment. Many of them are persistent in the environment as well. So these are quite difficult to study, and there's a lot of, you know, economic interest in not saying that these are harmful to health. And you know, as I was preparing for this talk, I was even looking on WebMD, and there was this whole thing about, you know, different things, you know, not being as harmful as some of the things that are listed here, not being as harmful as they are purported to be. And then the big quote that like kind of was used for this, and the person who they were like referencing as the expert on this was the chief of trade for personal care products. And I was like, it's an interesting person to ask. Like, wow, okay, you know, like they're you know, that's not a person who has sort of like an expertise in science, and it's also not a person who represents sort of like medical interests. So it's just an interesting sort of a thing. And to me, when I say that a lot of these things are banned in other countries, it tells me that there's enough of a concern that maybe we just shouldn't be using these on our body. And it is true that a lot of it comes from animal studies, but that's really kind of the only way we can study it in a lot of ways, just because of the way that, you know, being human, especially in the world as it is now with many different kinds of exposures, we can't really, it's very difficult to discern which exposures are causing what in terms of, you know, cancer and things like that. And so here we are with this kind of like muddy data, basically. And you'll see later on that kind of what that brings me personally to is like, let's keep it real simple. And you'll see that the things that I recommend are things that literally come from your kitchen, and not necessarily products. Just because, you know, so often a lot of the things that are these harmful additives are even there as, you know, ways to make things more shelf stable, or make them foam in a very particular way because people like that, or, you know, to change the color of something. So yeah, so you'll kind of see that later on, that sometimes the simple is really the best. Oxybenzone is something that's added to a lot of sunscreens generally, and it's been associated with hormone disruption, specifically pregnancy outcomes changing, and there's some question about it in terms of whether or not it increases the risk of endometriosis, but it definitely does have an estrogenic effect. There's a study that I didn't include in the resources that looked at, this is an interesting way to be able to study it, is they looked at people's estrogen levels before and after application of certain, you know, of these skincare products. And sometimes the application, their estrogen levels actually can increase after application. And to me, that, you know, that just says a lot right there. I don't even need that longer term study saying that increases the risk of cancer, because we know that estrogen is it promotes growth of cells. And so you know, if you add more estrogen to the mix, you know, it's pretty, I feel pretty confident saying that that's going to increase risk of cancer. Or at least there's enough of a hesitation that it could possibly increase risk of cancer that I think we should try to avoid things that increase estrogen levels. So, and you might hear about that, xenoestrogens, like so many things in the environment and chemicals are xenoestrogens, which means that they're like outside estrogens, that they come from outside and they increase our levels of estrogen. So that includes a lot of plastics, and then a lot of these ingredients as well. And then PABA is another one that para-aminobenzoic acid, that's another one that's sort of controversial in terms of whether it has a negative effect or a positive effect. One thing I notice is that it can be really irritating to some people. That's a common cause of people who say that they apply different creams and things and they get a rash every time. There's a lot of times it's that PABA that does that. And then parabens and phthalates are kind of specific in the sense that they're the ones that have more research associated with them being endocrine disruptors and possibly having cancer effects because of that. And specifically some of a bigger organization that works with breast cancer has come out and said, these are the things that are associated with breast cancer. And again, this is controversial. There's some for and against, and also there's one body of data that show that they increase levels of estrogen, but then the people who say that they aren't a problem are saying, well, we've never proven that they're a problem, so therefore they're not a problem, which is a little bit of a problematic stance, right? Because it basically means like, oh, we're doing an experiment and there's no way to gather the results of that experiment. So yeah, just because it hasn't necessarily been 100% proven to cause trouble, it's enough, if there's enough compelling data that it does cause trouble, that it's been banned. Phthalates specifically are not allowed in the European Union. In order to figure out whether or not your product contains phthalates, there's a couple different ways to do that. You can, look at the company's website. You can look at the label. A lot of times it'll say paraben and phthalate free. You can also call the company, and you can also go to this, you'll see at the bottom that Environmental Working Group Skin Deep website. It's at the bottom of the handout there. So it's just ewg.org and then Skin Deep. And that's it has a search function, so you can put in any product that you use and see what kind of grade it gets, and then look at the breakdown of what it contains and check to see if there's any phthalates. And it's nice because they kind of like boiled it down into a grade so that you can it's a 1 to 10 grade where lower numbers are better. And it's nice, it's very usable in that sense. Or if you're actually looking to buy a skincare product, you can actually go on there and ask and look at in a certain class, like say, I want to get a night cream, what's the best one that's out there in terms of safety. So that's an incredibly useful resource there. Let's see, where am I? And then petroleum and petroleum products, that there is the list, the kind of concern about contamination with benzene type chemicals, which are known to be cancer causing, is problematic. And then polyethylene glycol is another one, and triclosan. Triclosan is one that has been sort of, there's like an interesting, like it's basically not really allowed to be in products anymore, but it's still being kind of phased out. So it is that one has been in a lot of antimicrobial soaps and things like that. So, but you don't see that triclosan as much because of some of the changes that have happened regarding that. And to go back to formaldehyde for a second, one of the things that I think about a lot is, it's used a lot in hair straightening products. And there's been very little, despite really compelling literature about it causing cancer and increased risks of asthma, there's been very little oversight about it and very little restriction of it. And that really primarily affects the Black community because of hair straightening products being where it's really the highest. And so I also really think about that and how little has been done about formaldehyde type products. And I'm hopeful that changes soon, that there's more alternatives out there. So sodium lauryl sulfate or sodium laureth sulfate is something I look for, especially for people who have skin irritation or canker sores. It's actually a big one that people can get from that sodium lauryl sulfate. It is often written as SLS. And a lot of times when people have frequent canker sores, it's really worthwhile to have a toothpaste that is SLS free. The Jason one is SLS free, and the Squiggle is one I like, that is also does not contain that sodium lauryl sulfate. But if you just look up, sodium lauryl sulfate free toothpaste, you get a whole list online. And then, so really the big picture of this, you can probably hear that, like, I am not an expert in each of these chemicals and what they cause and what the problem is. And that's partially just one of not my strongest area of expertise. The thing that I do know is that there are a lot of additives. The thing that's really important to just know is we don't need to know all the specifics about each of these chemicals to know that we need to be cautious about the things that are in our skincare products. I think that one of the things that often makes people choose skincare products without this in mind is that it's easy to sort of think of skin as like a wrapper, like it's just like as if it's, just like just a surface, right? But actually, it's very permeable. It's an organ, and often people are more, thinking about skin more from a cosmetic perspective or, beauty perspective, and not so much of it as an organ. And I think a general rule of thumb that I like that actually comes from it's like something that Earth Mama Angel Baby says is like, if you wouldn't put it in your mouth, you probably shouldn't put it on your skin. And I think that's just a really great, sort of overall, statement about that, is that, we do see that things, do get absorbed through the skin. You can, especially with like, a lot of these different things, like oxybenzone is a big one. They find it in breast milk and urine. So that really tells us, like, how clearly it does get absorbed and become systemic. And that's not the only one. That most of these, you find some component that does get absorbed. The other way that we can have them cause irritation is through inhalation. So certain causing irritation to the lungs, which is where formaldehyde is also associated with increased risk of asthma. And I think a few of the other ones, I think phthalates are also associated with risk of asthma as well. The other thing, that we want to think about absorbing these chemicals is that there's a term that is becoming more and more widely used, which is obesogens. And what that means is chemicals that disrupt the endocrine system in a way that causes weight gain. So one of the things that we see is that, especially often things that are estrogenic, but also many of these compounds actually have been shown to shift metabolism and shift fat deposition. So they're actually like, really, they're called endocrine disruptors is another term that is used. And many of these chemicals are known endocrine disruptors. So it's more of a matter of to what extent are they endocrine disruptors. And so one of the things that I think about with that is that even if we know that something is, a quote unquote mild endocrine disruptor, what happens when we then encounter 10 other mild endocrine disruptors in the same day? And really, I think that there is an additive effect there. And we are so inundated with these kinds of endocrine disrupting chemicals that we see this on bigger population-based measures. There's a lot of different theories about why this is happening, but even just age of menarche which is first menstrual period, has decreased dramatically in the last 50 years, and so there's a lot of different theories about why that is, but one of the predominant ones is really about these estrogens that are in the environment and that are in skincare products and really all over in the environment, plastics and skincare products. So that's a big conversation, but just all that to say that when we think about these chemicals, it's not so much just about cancer, because there's a lot of things about these chemicals being associated with risk of cancer, is also just on a day-to-day level about whether or not they are disrupting thyroid hormones, estrogens, and whether or not they're leading to increased weight gain and different types of metabolic changes as well. So any questions about all of that? I can't promise I'll know the answer, but any questions about these ingredients?
So is there a list of things that Is, or is it under the reference of things that we should be looking for that's in there?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Yes. So in the reference, you can see the environmental working group does have, you can choose like which are the best of these products. When I think about what we should be using, it kind of depends on the situation. When we get into moisturizer, my moisturizers actually, which is the next thing, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But in terms of things we should be using, anything that's more like a food type of a thing, like anything that's like directly from a plant or directly food is good, is going to be better than something that you can't pronounce. And that's just like a good rule of thumb for as much for food as for skincare products. And there are, I guess that would really be, that's the best way to sum up what we are looking for. I'll keep thinking about that. I'll come back to that throughout here to see if there's anything else I can say about what else would are good things to include. And actually, probably with sunscreen is where that will come up the most of, what things are going to be the most important to make sure that they're present and for effectiveness purposes. Anybody else? Any other questions about chemicals?
Well, I was looking for the handy dandy buy this, don't buy that, but because I'm trying to use my old products right now, and I'm pretty sure my Banana Republic is just not doing the job. I mean, I can tell I'm darkening when I shouldn't be darkening, and so I need to buy something better.
Yep.
And you look at the arrays, and they're so expensive. The ones that it must be better because it's more expensive. Like, I'm glad I waited.
Yep. Right, totally. And not always, I'll say, not always better, but they're more expensive. That especially, we'll get into that. Under each thing, I do have listed some of the products that I recommend. The environmental.
My printer ate it, so I'm at it. I'm going to have to do it electronically. I'm not sure it'll recover. I don't know. You can't see it, but I can point the. You see that?
I certainly did. Oh dear. Yeah, and even for the people who are listening, a lot of times I'll go over it too for those people too. So not just the printer eat it. Right. So when we think about moisturizers, like you might be surprised. I mean, I sort of was like trying to come up with like, oh, what's a good moisturizer? What's a good product to recommend? And it really comes down. Then I started to be like, well, I always think about like recommending things that I don't use is kind of always or that I personally don't, it's just like, oh wait, what's actually what I use and what is actually really, really works well and we know is a lot safer is using just regular old olive oil or coconut oil. So those two have sort of different properties and are effective in different ways. The olive oil is really nourishing, and there's some people who say that it like boosts collagen, and I just know it feels really nice, and it's a light moisturizer that absorbs quite well. And you can get really high quality olive oil for a fraction of the price of what you would end up paying for any kind of moisturizer. Coconut oil is a little bit different in the sense that it's more of a sealant, so it actually kind of like covers the skin and it holds the moisture in that way. So it doesn't necessarily, it's not as like deeply moisturizing because it's not even as well absorbed by the skin, but it does sort of like seal the skin, and that's really nice if you have eczema or you have some kind of disruption of the skin barrier, especially because that'll help keep the layer, the sort of protective layer of the skin intact. If you like know you're going to be gardening or something like that, it's nice for kind of keeping some of those irritants a little bit off your skin. So there's a lot of plants that create a little bit of irritation. So yeah, olive oil is great. If you apply it after a shower, before toweling off is a nice time, because the having your skin a little bit damp is actually even better for the absorption of it. And actually, just in general, when your skin is warm, it's better to apply moisturizer when your skin is warm, so it absorbs it a little bit better because the pores are open. Jojoba or jojoba oil, people have different ways of pronouncing it, is really wonderful. That's an anti-inflammatory one. And it's really good for conditions like eczema. The one I didn't list here is argan oil. there's different kind of, that's another great one that has an anti-inflammatory property. And there's this, there's a whipped argan oil. So it's just argan oil, but they sort of, I guess they whip it up and like in a blender, and that actually creates like more of a cream. So if you really like having that sort of like moisturizer cream quality, that is a nice option.
What is that now? Organ?
Argan, A-R-G-A-N.
Oh,
Yep, that's another one people use.
A-R-G-A?
A-R-G-A-N. Yep. I've seen that be really helpful for eczema and psoriasis as well, actually, the whipped argan oil. So those are some of my favorites. I mean, they're very, obviously very simplified. The drawbacks are that they don't have that sort of easy to apply cream consistency. So at the very bottom, you'll see I included a recipe that it might be a little bit intimidating, but it's actually quite easy. You just basically warm things up and then combine them and put them in a jar. It's a olive oil and coconut oil moisturizer. It has a little bit of beeswax in it. So it just has olive oil, coconut oil, and beeswax. And you can add any essential oils that you like or things like that. But that's a really nice one if you sort of love that, like having like a cream consistency to work with. The olive oil too, you can apply it to like a washcloth and apply it that way. Sometimes that makes it easier. I usually just put it on, put a little bit on my fingers, and you can rub it around pretty easily. You get used to it pretty quickly. At first it seems weird to be applying just a liquid oil, but it's like something ends up feeling really normal very quickly.
Do you smell like a salad?
Nope, actually olive oil doesn't really have a strong smell. It's so yeah, luckily, there are times I tell people to put vinegar on their skin, and that's the feedback I always get, is that like I'm walking around smelling like a salad. but vinegar is a fantastic thing to use on your skin if you have any kind of like a yeast overgrowth. Typically like in any folds of the body, when you get that redness and irritation, the half and half vinegar and water solution. I totally went on a tangent over there. Sorry about that. But yeah, so those are some of my favorite oils and you can find, if you're looking for products and things, Environmental Working Group, you can look at the ones you can get in the store, but also, there's a lot of great homemade, moisturizers out there. If you go to Etsy, it's a place where people make their own things, and a lot of times they'll say on them, I made this thing out of, coconut oil, olive oil, and beeswax, and just those 3 ingredients. And generally I trust, those kinds of places, not necessarily if they're putting fragrances in there. A lot of times they can put fake fragrances in there, but if it's an unscented one, you can, generally people making it at home aren't adding these really, these chemical compounds so much. They're using regular ingredients. So that's one direction to go, or to have fun making it yourself. Actually, that would be a fun activity or workshop thing, is to like make a bunch of skincare products. I love doing that. It's really fun. You can make like, your lip balm and your deodorant and all kinds of things that are fun to make, and pretty easy too, actually, and generally pretty simple ingredients, just like the one I listed at the bottom there. And then deodorants, this is a hot topic here. I don't know if everybody's has encountered this hot topic, but it sort of like hit the internet as being like be very careful about deodorants, and specifically about aluminum. And there's a lot of back and forth about this. And one thing is that, to know about aluminum is your body doesn't absorb it all that well through your skin. It's too big to be really easily absorbed. And also there's people who, there's data showing that maybe it is absorbed, because they found aluminum in breast tissue. The big claim that's out there is that, aluminum based deodorants make, cause problems with breast tissue, including breast cancer. That's another one that falls into this zone where, that we can't, that's not an easy study to do, right? Because we're talking about 20 years of use, and it's pretty hard to find a person who hasn't, used deodorant ever. And also, even if we did find this group used deodorant and this group didn't, there's so many other factors, right? So, it would be hard. You can't really the observational study is very limited because the same person who's not using that aluminum deodorant might be also the same person who's shopping at the co-op and eating all organic foods. There's so many different factors that play into that we can't really create this sort of like if then scenario. So basically that's very controversial. The main concern that I have when I look at deodorants is how many of them have fragrance listed and how many of them contain the parabens and phthalates, specifically the phthalates. So so some of those stronger fragrances, those are the ones that have been found to be endocrine disruptors. They do have some of the chemicals under that title fragrance have cancer causing properties, and we are putting the deodorant very, very close to the breast tissue, which the rates of breast cancer are so high that something we really want to be thoughtful about from that perspective. But especially when I think about again we're like stepping outside of the research, because this body research just isn't really there, is if we know that phthalates cause increased risk estrogen levels locally and also systemically, it's not a far leap to say that maybe we shouldn't be applying them to our armpits. But that's not necessarily, I can't say that from like it has been proven that this and this and this, but I can say that from maybe that's not the best idea kind of perspective, especially because we have alternatives. We don't need to use those things, right? We don't need to use the highly scented, artificial scented things. There's a lot of other options out there, and right now, partially because of that sort of explosion of that discussion about aluminum and about deodorants, there's a lot of different natural deodorants out there with natural fragrances, natural essential oil fragrances, and even unscented as well. And again, there's a whole environmental working group website. There's a whole section about deodorants and which ones are the best, and you can find different ones there. There is the one that I like is the Now brand unscented one, and that one does get a 1 rating on. And I like that one because it works well. Because that's the other thing, is there's a lot of natural deodorants out there that do not work very well. And there's some enzyme ones. The other thing to keep in mind when people are trying different natural deodorants is if you tend towards having more like yeast overgrowth or that red itchiness in the folds of your body, the baking soda can often make that worse. So it kind of creates an environment where yeast can grow a little bit better. There's quite a few people who get a rash under their armpits from using baking soda based deodorants. So just kind of keeping an eye out for that. And if you're a person who tends towards that, I would just sort of steer clear of the ones that contain baking soda. So, and then sun protection is kind of like the big topic here. And I want to, so a couple different things to kind of keep in mind. UVA protection is something that is not actually it's not part of the SPF categorization here in the United States. In other countries, that is something that is part of that it's required to have some UVA protection. So UVA and UVB. UVA is the parts of the sun rays that cause like long-term skin damage and still contributes to the development of skin cancer. UVB is the range that causes the actual burn to happen. So the sunscreens here are really regulated in terms of what they can say is the SPF for the UVB, but not necessarily for the UVA. So if you look on Environmental Working Group, you'll see they rate the different sunscreens on how well they protect UVA and UVB. That's the only place I know of to get that information actually, because it's not really well established. Even there's some sunscreens that will say on them, broad spectrum protection, and they don't actually have broad spectrum protection. There's no regulation on them saying that statement. So Environmental Working Group is totally the place to look for that. And I'll give you my favorite ones down here. Go ahead.
Did you have that down? Environmental Working Group, that's where you have the
that's the skin heat one. That's in the resources section. Yeah.
Okay.
So above and beyond, the very best way to get skin protection is to wear clothing, hats, and stay in the shade. So nothing is going to compare to that. It's no amount of sunscreen. Sunscreen does give us some protection, but we don't want to think about it as complete protection. They're making a lot of really wonderful sun protective clothing now that's very breathable. It doesn't make you hot. I actually have something it's a sun protection hoodie, so it's really nice because it protects your whole neck too. Because I don't know about you all, but that's like a classic place that gets burnt. And also it's really nice for my shoulders. I'm also a person, we're going to talk about reapplication. I always forget to reapply. And wearing sun protective clothing is so nice just because you don't have to deal with that anymore. The reapplication issue. So another thing to really that we want to highlight is the fact that there's a sunscreen called Black Girl Sunscreen. A lot of people with darker skin don't really like to wear sunscreen because it makes it kind of like it leaves like a white sheen, and it looks weird. And so this sunscreen came out as one that doesn't do that. There's also sort of a commonly held belief that people with darker skin tones don't require sunscreen, and in fact, it's very important. There still is a risk of melanoma and skin cancer. And one of the things that is really quite concerning is the fact that melanoma and skin cancer is often a much later diagnosis in darker skinned people because it's harder to detect at times. So definitely, that's something that's kind of being talked about more finally, and something we all need to be thinking about as well. My favorite sunscreens that I tend to use and they score well on the environmental working group are the Badger brand is the one I've kind of used for a while, and this is also because a lot of these mineral-based sunscreens, I don't know if any of you have tried these mineral-based sunscreens, but a lot of them are pretty hard to apply. They really can be thick, and they can be like hard to rub in, but I do like Badger. They do a good job of making it easy to rub in. And All Good is another brand that's wonderful and easy to rub in. And the All Good has an even better rating in terms of UVA protection as well. And that one's available at Target now. So I think Badger is available at Target as well. I know Badger is available at Fiddleheads if you go there. There's also something to watch out for is that there's a lot of these kind of like natural and mineral-based sunscreens that actually have some of the compounds that aren't so good for you, or that don't actually provide sufficient protection. So we'll talk a little bit about application really affects the level of protection, but also the fact that they, even like I was looking at, just as I was kind of playing around with that environmental working group website, one of the things that I really noticed was like, things like this company called Baby Organics, which is like, organics, baby sunscreen, actually, and is like twice as expensive. It actually got rated far below I think it was copper tone, like one of the main ones, so it's really, it's great. You can even, on your phone have the environmental working group and, website and plug it in while you're at the store if you want to do it that way, or just use it to like order your things. But so, really you can't tell a whole lot from a label very often. And same thing with like Sun Bum. I was surprised that one didn't score very well. But then sometimes there's the store brand, the regular old store brand is the one that actually is better quality. And really when we look at mineral-based sunscreens, they're usually titanium or zinc, and those don't actually get absorbed, and they're good at keeping the sun from sort of contacting this, or shining directly on the skin there. I think, and also just in a general sense, avoiding sunscreen sprays is important because there's risk of inhalation, and there's sort of more and more a gathering body of data saying that we probably shouldn't be necessarily using sunscreen sprays. Best to apply them. They're making a lot of these sunscreen sticks that are really nice and easier to apply, especially for the mineral-based sunscreens. That the stick is a nice way to do that. Probably even more, as important as what sunscreen you choose is how you apply it. So there was a study that the the American Academy of Dermatology did about people and the average amount of sunscreen that they apply is actually, you know, a quarter to a third of what they really need to reach the SPF limit. So if you take, you know, if you have your SPF 40 sunscreen and you apply it too thinly, it's basically the same as using an SPF 7. And so the recommendation, and this is hard because it's kind of like, you know, it feels different with different sunscreens, but to apply approximately an ounce of sunscreen when you're applying things. So that's like a whole entire palmful, which is a lot more than people usually apply. And that's, you know, and that's where we also get into, a lot of times people have leftover sunscreen that might be even 2 to 3 years old. I know I do too. And I know I recently made the mistake of using very old sunscreen and got a horrible sunburn. And yeah, because I was just like, oh yeah, I've got this hanging around, I better use it. And sunscreen does go bad. It definitely does. Even the mineral-based ones do kind of separate in a way that they're not as protective. So it's good to get rid of expired sunscreen. And then the other thing is reapplication. And again, this is why the clothing is so much easier, being in the shade is so much easier, because really you should be reapplying every 2 hours. And more often, if you're going swimming and you come out of the water, it's good to reapply then. And it's also really good if you're sweating profusely to reapply more often as well. So so yeah, any questions about? I know there's probably a lot of questions about sunscreen, but any questions that are coming up right now?
Dr. Gwenn, do you know anything about the native product? It's
oh yeah, yep, totally, yep. I'm sorry, I just noticed your thing there. So yeah, those are good. They're excellent. They don't get the highest rating on Environmental Working Group. I believe I was just looking at them today. I believe they were like a 4 or 5, so that's really not bad. But it's but they're great because they are scented with essential oils, so they don't have like the phthalates in them. So definitely a good step up.
all right. And how about the Blue Lizard sunscreen? Have you heard of that?
Ooh, I don't know that one, but actually, you know what? Here, let's do this together. Watch this. We can do. I'm gonna find. Let's look at this together in terms of this. I'll show you all how we look something up on Environmental Working Group and like sort of what you're looking for. And then that way, so that you kind of know how to use that resource there. Let me do, okay. So, sure. So yeah, so this is a good chance to get to use this. Can everybody see that right there? This Environmental Working Group thing, yeah, okay. So we're gonna look up native deodorant. And then we can do, I mean, we can really do any of them, but so you click on it. So the number 3 there was like the overall score that it gets. And then when you look at it, you can actually get more information about, you know, here it gives you sort of like, why is it given a 3 instead of a 1? And it looks like for this one, it's basically that there's kind of like a risk of some allergies involved. And this one, it's interesting. I guess they list it as fragrances, but I know that they say that they use the, that's interesting because you can see here that they use the word fragrance, but in terms of what they say on the packaging, this is a good lesson, and don't always believe the packaging. What they say on the packaging is that they use essential oils as fragrances, but here, once they're using the word fragrance, I get skeptical because usually that you wouldn't even use the word fragrance unless you were kind of like hiding something, basically. So yeah, so that's interesting, but it does get a 3, so it does tell me that it's not, you know, it's not as much as some of the other ones that are out there. Let's see. So yeah, I guess that mostly what it's saying is that people can have a lot of irritation and allergic potential. And then these are kind of nice. These little circles that they have, they're kind of nice because you can kind of identify what your biggest concerns are, whether it's, I want to make sure that, it's not, toxic to my hormones, or that it doesn't cause cancer. You can kind of like do this as a quick check to see what, which ones are sort of in line with your personal priorities. But then the other thing you can do with this is you can also go here and you can go to deodorants, and then it'll give you, you can sort by best to worst, and it gives you, like these are all the kind of the top ones, right? And these are the ones that they rate the highest. There's the EWG verified, means they approve of everything that's in there. There's no concerns. And so these first ones you'll see are just kind of like in that category. But then once we get down to here, there's the ones that are like this, they get the score of 1, which means that there might be something in there that could cause some irritation, but not necessarily anything that's really harmful to health. So there's a little quick tutorial on using that website, and literally they have pretty much every product in there, so you can just put it in there and come up with a score, and then also with a way to another product in that same line that would have less health concerns associated with it. Alrighty, and then in terms of the resources, you'll see that I put that website, but it's just that ewg.org. That's a great website also for, we've talked about that in terms of like the Dirty Dozen and looking at organic vegetables and things like that. But it's also a, that Skin Deep section of it is all about cosmetics. And then if you want to get kind of more information, safecosmetics.org is another website that is doing a lot of lobbying and work around, promoting safety in cosmetics products. And then if you want a list of the phthalate-free cosmetics, that's on that Breast Cancer Action website. And then the last thing I put on there is that little recipe for the olive oil and coconut. Oh, and also if you're curious to know more about what things are banned in other countries that are allowed here, I mean, that's a great place to start, is just sort of like knowing that there was enough compelling research to ban those things. I feel like that's a great place to start, is just to avoid the things that are on that list. But so hopefully that gives you some tools that you can use to discern what things are, the best, and also some specific products to use, and also just sort of like that reminder of like, sometimes the very basic is the best. So any other questions or thoughts? Go ahead.
I have as I've gotten older, extremely dry skin. So what is there that you recommend for dry skin?
That's going to come up even more in the talk about skin health and skin, how skin functions. Is actually a lot of times that's an internal question as much as an external question. So we do want to think about moisturizers, and olive oil is a fantastic one, and you probably would notice a difference with that. But also, even more importantly, getting omega-3 fatty acids, from fish and nuts can make a big difference. There was also someone was sharing with me that when she started eating more blueberries, she noticed a really significant improvement in her skin as well, and the elasticity of her skin. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. She really started, eating quite a bit of, about quarter cup to a half a cup of blueberries a day. So very often, those are components as well. Hydration, like actual drinking of water, is very important for skin health as well, and for preventing dry skin. And then what some people would talk about too would be exfoliation, and how important it is to exfoliate. And that can look like, using, a washcloth, or like one of those exfoliating gloves, just to gently do, those are great. A lot of the exfoliating scrubs have things that, don't break down but you can also do like a salt scrub or things like that as an exfoliant. But for your face, a very gentle one like a washcloth is a nice way to get a little bit of exfoliation.
Thank you.
All righty, anybody else?
I think I'm good.
All right, wonderful.
Thank you very much.
I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and good to see you. Take care.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Oh,
You too.